Hello and welcome back to Triple Crown Wargaming with me, the Duke. And today, in our second video this week, we are taking a look at the movement phase. Now, like the strategy phase, there are 4 sub-phases. Unlike the strategy phase, this covers a whole lot of pages in the book. So, this may well be a little bit longer than the strategy phase video yesterday, but if you haven't checked that out already, make sure you head back and check that one out first. And then we can go through all of these videos in the right order. Now, like I said yesterday, generally I'm just going to be looking at the changes from 8th edition rather than going through the whole phase, because generally a lot of it is the same. I might gloss over some things, they help clarify something I'm about to talk about, but generally I'll just be looking at changes. So the 1 inch rule, not really a change as such, as 8th edition did have that. Unless you were charging something, you had to stay an inch away from it. There is a slight change here though, in that it says if you while you're moving, I'll get the words right in a minute, while you're moving, you can go within an inch of other units, friendly or enemy. And once you stop your movement, if you stop your movement within an inch, then you just have to nudge those units apart by the shortest distance possible. So no... none of this, oh, you can't move through there. So I get it. It was annoying if you had, I don't know, something on a 50mm base and the gap was 55mm or 60mm. You had enough space to get your base through, but you couldn't because of that 1 inch rule. But now, not so much. You can move through, and if you stop in a gap like that, you just nudge the units a little bit further apart. I don't mind that. It's going to make manoeuvring a little bit easier, but there are some other rules around manoeuvring which, to be honest, we probably won't get to in this video because it's actually to do with certain units and how they move, that make movement and positioning a little bit more difficult. So I don't mind that as such. Now, on to the first sub-phase, the declare charges and charge reactions. The big change here, really, is that you declare all of your charges and then your opponent declares all of their reactions. So it's not charge, react, like it was in 8th edition. It's I declare, react, react. As for the reactions, they're pretty much the same, or well, they are the same. The ones in this section anyway, you've got hold, stand and shoot, or flee. They all work exactly the same. So no big changes there. The only difference is, obviously now, if you choose to flee, for example, if you're charged by 2 or 3 units, you know, you've got yourself surrounded almost, you're charged by 2 or 3 units, as soon as you declare flee once, obviously you're fleeing from all of them, but you declare after all those charges, you declare your reaction after all those charges are declared. So you always flee from the unit with the largest unit strength, and if it's a tie, you randomise. However, you only flee once. So whereas before, in 8th edition, if I declared a charge and you decided to flee, I could then charge you with something else, because you would move immediately, you'd move that flee immediately and make you flee again. So units could go 15, 20, 25 inches if you kept being able to make them flee. Now, however, you only flee once. And we'll get onto that a little bit later, actually, in this video, but that's common for flee in general. You cannot make a unit move with a flee move more than once per turn. If it is required to flee, again, for whatever reason, in the same turn that it's already moved, it counts as fleeing 0 inches. So it still counts as fleeing, just doesn't move at all. I suppose it stops units being sort of herded off and, you know, forcing them to flee off with charges you're very unlikely to make. In 8th edition, I know if you have, like, a flying unit, for instance, something flees from one of your units, you've got a flying unit that's 21 inches away. 22 inches away even. Yeah, you could make that charge. It's very unlikely you make it, but you could make it, which means that unit has to then flee again, potentially off the board. It was a bit of a feel-bad moment, I think, for some people when that happened to them, so I can understand why they changed it. Stand and shoot is the same. You can only declare 1 stand and shoot per turn, and obviously if you're already in combat or you're fleeing, you can't stand and shoot. No changes there. You also can't stand and shoot against one and then flee from a subsequent one. If you declare flee, that's it. That's your reaction to all of the charges that are charged against that unit anyway. Now, charge moves, which is actually the next sub-phase, I think. Yes, it is. It's the next sub-phase. hence the 2. So your charge range is, I would say, across the board, significantly shorter than it was in 8th edition. So 8th edition, 2d6 add your movement, very simple. In the old world, it is 2d6 pick the highest and add your movement. Now, there are rules which affect that. Swift Stride just gives you an extra dice on top of that. So it's 2d6, pick the highest, plus d6. It's not just 3d6, pick the 2 highest. It's a distinct difference. But yeah, at least for infantry, generally, your charge range is just 2d6, pick the highest, plus your movement. And there is also this concept down here of a maximum possible charge range. Now, this comes in with some special rules. So some special rules might give you an extra d6. I think Swift Stride actually is a good example of one. Swift Stride gives you an extra d6 to your charge range. However, it only increases your maximum possible charge by 3 inches. So if we take movement 8 cavalry, for instance, normally your maximum possible charge for a unit is movement plus 6, because that's the highest you can roll on one dice. So for a movement 8 unit, that would be 14. If you then have Swift Stride, technically you could roll a 20, because you could roll 2d6, pick the highest, get 6, roll a 6 on your Swift Stride dice, plus your movement of 8, you could get 20. But you can only declare a charge if it's within 17, because your maximum possible charge is your movement plus 6 plus the 3 that Swift Stride gives you. So they've just made a bit of a distinction there. Which, yeah, I don't hate it. I don't think it was really necessary, to be honest. If you want to go for those charges where you need 6s on multiple dice, go large, you know. But it's something we've got to work with. Not the end of the world. The charge move itself we'll go over a little bit later. And foul charges work the same. You just move the single highest dice rolled if you don't, make the distance. So no changes there. Compulsory moves then. So if you've watched yesterday's strategy phase video, you'll know that the rally fleeing troops part is done actually in the strategy phase now. But this point is where you move any units that continue to flee. And it does specify you have to do this at the start of the compulsory moves phase. So you move all fleeing units first, which we'll go over. There's no big changes really in how fleeing units move, but we'll brush over them a little bit later. And you have to do that first, and then you move anything else that moves in this phase. So what else moves? Random movers, they'll move in this phase. So things like fanatics, mangler squigs, they still have random movement. Anything else that just specifies it moves as a compulsory movement, this is when it's done after those fleeing units. And then the last one is remaining moves. Nothing really too different there. It's just all your other moves, obviously. This is, however, also the point where your wizards can cast conveyance spells. It does say that bit here. Conveyance spells can be cast at any point during this subphase. So, and obviously your opponent can dispel them. Like I said yesterday, spells are spread throughout the turn, not just in their own magic phase, which doesn't exist anymore. Big sad. But yeah, so this is where you do conveyance spells. It then goes in over the next, I think about 6 pages, to be honest, quite a few. Movement in more detail. So this was a very basic look at movement. This is movement in more detail. Obviously, marching is still a thing, W movement. Enemy sighted, that's the whole march block, a lot of people called it in 8th edition. If an enemy unit are not fleeing, enemy unit is within 8, then you have to take a leadership test. If you foul, you can't march. You can still move, but you can't march. If you pass it, you can march. There is a slight, I think, difference from 8th. I don't remember this being in 8th edition. But if you foul the test, the unit, even if the player then decides not to move the unit at all, they still count as marching. They can't shoot, which is a big deal, I think, to be honest. It also means actually you can't cast some spells, which we'll get onto in tomorrow's video, which you would cast in the shooting phase. It means you can't cast them either. So, I like that, to be honest, because it gives you a little bit of jeopardy then in that sort of March test. It's not just I'll see if I can do it and then decide. It's no, you have to make your mind up now, because actually it will matter if you fail it. So, I like that. Big fan. Maneuvers themselves, not really different. Wheel is just a wheel. I'm sure we all know how that works. Backwards and sideways, they take half of your movement characteristic each. There are and reform, obviously, we all know what a reform is. There's a couple of extra ones, though. So a turn. So when I first read this, even looking at the pictures, to be honest, I just assumed that was a pivot on the spot. And then a 90-degree pivot, or turn, sorry, takes a quarter of your movement. A 180-degree takes half of your movement. However, looking at the pictures again, just before recording this video, which is a good job I did, you don't just pivot on the spot. You don't actually stay in the same formation. So as you can see from the second picture, hopefully you can see it on the camera, this unit originally was 5 wide, 3 and a bit deep. But then it turns 90 degrees and now it's only 3 wide and 5 and a bit deep. So literally each model turns on the spot, and then any in a sort of incomplete rank at the back move around to form that incomplete rank again. Obviously a 180 degree, you are literally just pivoting on the spot 180 degrees. So there's no change for that one. It's only the 90 degree that matters. But yeah, that's a really, I'm going to use the word, interesting choice they've made there. I don't actually know how useful turning will be. I'll tell you when it might be useful, actually, is if you want to go into a marching column formation, which is one of the formations that units can go into, which effectively triples your move when you march. I wonder if you could turn and then triple move the rest of your movement. Probably not, thinking about it, because you'd have had to declare you were marching to triple your speed in, before you do anything. So I don't even think it'd work for that. So yeah, really not sure when that's going to come in, apart from very niche situations. But we've still got the reform if you if you want to, stick in the same formation, stay 5 wide and just turn around. That does take all of your movement though. So there are certainly downsides to that to keep in mind. And as far as I've seen, the Swift reform isn't a thing anymore. It's possibly something I've missed, but I don't remember seeing Swift reforming being a thing. So yeah, that is quite a big deal. The other one though, the other addition is this redress the ranks. So this is, word-wise, it's a little bit tricky, so I'll try and paraphrase it as best I can. But you redress the ranks by moving models to or from the rear ranks to decrease or increase the number of models in their front rank. A unit can use half of its movement to deduct up to 5 models from its front rank or add up to 5 models to its front rank. The models in the remaining ranks are then rearranged to match the number of models in the front rank and then maintain the sort of correct formation. But so essentially what that means is, if you are 10 wide, for instance, you can redress the ranks to go 5x2. Or if you're 5x4, you can redress the ranks to go up to a 10x2. Or you could go 7x3 and a bit. Or no, 2 and a bit. But, almost 7x3. So you can basically make your front rank up to 5 models bigger or smaller with this redress the ranks. And that takes half of your movement. So, sort of prepares yourself for combat, I suppose. Or, preparing yourself to get more shots if you're a shooting unit. Nice that that's an option, I suppose. Then finally, this Ends of the World. So previously in 8th edition, the edges of the battlefield were basically treated like impassable terrain. Couldn't move off them, only fleeing units could go off of the edge of the battlefield. However, in the old world, you can momentarily go off the edge of the battlefield. So if you're wheeling, if you're pivoting, reforming, whatever it is, moving around terrain, while you're still moving, your unit can go off the edge of the battlefield as long as you don't stay off the edge of the battlefield by the time you're done. Probably won't come up a lot, but it's in there. It's nice they clarified it. So the charge move itself, this is where we get into more detail. Generally, it's the same. From what I can see, it is the same as it was. The only real change here, because you're aligned to the enemy, or close the door as it was called, is still free. You don't have to pay for that movement in your charge move. What it does say is, as long as you can maximise the number of models in contact with a wheel, you have to, and then that's the wheel you pay for. But to be honest, you'd do that in 8th edition anyway. The only difference is, in 8th edition, you measured closest to closest. Now you actually have to measure the distance that you're going to move. So from how I understand it, this could be wrong, but from how I understand it, if you are offset a bit like this picture, but more offset. So if you've only got 2 models that are actually, if they move straight forward, would actually hit this unit up here. 2 of these knights would actually hit this unit. Then if you only roll that distance, you can move straight forward. Say you're exactly 9 inches away and your movement 7. Say you only roll a 2 on the highest of 2d6. You can just move straight forwards and hit the unit there in that sort of formation, so only 2 models hit. However, if you roll a 12, you have to wheel around as much as you can within that, still giving yourself enough movement to make contact, but you have to wheel around to maximise the number of models in combat. That's how I've read this. Now, we may get FAQs from Games Workshop clarifying this, erratas perhaps, but that's how I've read it. Let me know down below what you think of how this sort of wording reads to you. Let me know if you think I'm wrong, I'm way off base. Just, yeah, let me know your thoughts. It'll be interesting to see what the community as a whole thinks this means. Because, to be honest, the pictures are quite confusing, helpfully, because it looks like this unit could just move straight forwards and all of the models would be in contact. You'd only be corner to corner, but all the models would be in contact. It feels like this wheel is completely unnecessary. So, yeah, not helpful in any way, to be honest, but that's how I've read it. The flank and rear charges here, obviously you charge into the arc that your unit is in before it moves. If your unit is across 2 arcs, then you go into the arc where the majority of the unit is in. If there is any, if they're split in half and there's uncertainty about what arc they're in, you don't randomize it anymore. You just pick the arc that gives the least bonus. So if you're in the front and the flank and you're split across that arc, then you go into the front. If you're in the flank and the rear, then you go into the flank. Nice and easy. No more dice rolls. Getting towards the end of it now. So just unusual situations with charging. If you can't align to the enemy, which is the old close the door, if you can't make that move, the enemy still closes to you if they can. However, you would then count as making a disordered charge, so no initiative bonus for charging. Normally, I'm sure most of you are aware, normally when you charge you get up to +3 initiative, up to +4 if you're in the flank or rear for each full inch you move in the charge move. But if you can't close the door or align to the enemy, as it's now called, you don't get that. And the enemy has to align to you. If they can't align to you, they don't have to. So you can have scenarios where it's just, you are literally like this and then you don't move anymore. You're just at weird angles. You can make that charge. If you charge through terrain, I'll be honest, it seems really bad for you. I would fully suggest never charging through terrain unless you absolutely have to. Because not only do you take 1 off of your movement, which is the normal rules for moving through terrain, but you also pick the lower of the 2 dice when you roll your charge move, not the higher. That seems really harsh. Really harsh. And if you end your movement, I'm not sure it says it here, I think it gets onto it a bit later. If you end your movement in terrain with more than a quarter of your models in terrain, you count as disrupted as well, so you don't get rank bonus. So yeah, wood elves in their woods, sitting in their little free forest that they still get, you are going to be very safe for a long time from those charges. Yeah, big negatives for charging through terrain. Not a fan. I'm sure there will be rules to ignore that. To be honest, off the top of my head, I'm not sure if move through cover does ignore it, although I would suggest it probably does. But yeah, big negatives. Not a fan. If you charge a fleeing enemy unit, if they flee from your charge, you then don't redirect. You can carry on into them, or you get the choice. You can redirect if you want, or you can, carry on charging them. Very standard. If you go to run them down, if you make a successful charge and reach them, you then hit their unit, align to them, they're destroyed, no changes there. If you don't make it, you just go the full distance that you charge. It doesn't count as a failed charge anymore, so you'd go your movement plus the highest of 2d6. That's a little bit of a change. Redirecting is the same in sort of how it works, with a couple of caveats. So you only test to redirect after the enemy unit has fled and moved their distance, as far as I can tell. Big change there. And a unit that you redirect into doesn't have time to make a stand and shoot reaction, so they can only hold or flee. That's a very big change. Will it come up often? Probably not. But, it's nice for the charger when it does come up. But other than that, generally redirecting is the same. You can only redirect once again. no sort of redirecting continually. And obviously you can only redirect if there is something for you to redirect into. Multiple charging units into one unit, they're counted as moving simultaneously, so you have to maximise the number of models from each. No big changes there. If you can't charge one unit without hitting other units, you can still make the charge, except all of those units get to make charge reactions against you. And any that have to align to you, so in this example, if you've got a really wide unit and you charge all three of these units at the same time and hit them at the same time, B and D have to align to you, which means you count it as a disordered charge, so no initiative bonus against those units. I think, to be honest, that probably would have been cleaner if it just said the charge is disordered completely. But you do still get the initiative bonus against this unit that they don't have to align to you. You align to them, but not against the others. That's a bit, to be honest, I can't see it coming up much, but yeah, I feel like they could have probably made that a bit cleaner. There's some bits about accidental contact in here. Now, to be honest, I don't really get how a lot of them would ever happen. There's like accidental contact when running down a foe. If the charging unit, you choose to, carry on your charge against a fleeing unit, but you accidentally contact another enemy unit. I don't really understand how you'd accidentally contact another enemy unit, unless that unit is also fleeing and has fled into your way. I get that. But which sort of it goes into over here. So you basically have two options. You can hold off your charge and you stop an inch away from them, but it doesn't count as a failed charge, which is nice. Or you continue ahead, and if they're fleeing, you destroy them, like any fleeing unit. If they are not fleeing, then you just count as charging them. I don't really understand why they needed that whole few paragraphs to explain that, but they do. The one thing actually that I forgot to mention on fleeing units, let me flick back to here, charging the fleeing unit. If you do run them down and catch them, you can immediately take a leadership test and then reform. So you're not just stuck facing whatever way they fled. You can then turn around and reform. That's a nice little addition. More rules for flee. So like I said, generally the rules for fleeing haven't changed. You roll 2d6, that's how far you flee. No big changes. You only change direction when you hit impassable terrain, then you pivot around it. You don't wheel, you pivot around it. Fleeing through friendly units, you just move through them. If you stop on them, then you stop and inch your way out the back of them. Fleeing through enemy units. Now, this used to be a dangerous terrain test, just on a 1 for every model you take a wound. Now it's a peril test. Dangerous terrain test is still a thing, but this is a peril test. And I've got to say, much more perilous. Now it's a 1, 2, or 3 you take a wound. So, big change there. Literally cutting down half of your unit on average. Very scary. You don't suffer the movement penalties for terrain when you flee through them, but you still have to take dangerous terrains. No real change there. And if you have to flee from multiple units at the same time, so if multiple units declare a charge on you and you decide to flee, you flee from the one with the highest unit strength. The final page of movement, there are a lot of rules of movement. I think this is probably the biggest phase in terms of pages in the rulebook, to be honest, because they go into a lot. I mean, even here, they go into stuff that I think should have been in the combat phase section of the rulebook, because it only really happens then. But give ground and fall back in good order. So these are results from a unit losing combat. So if you give ground, you just push 2 inches back. You do not pivot or turn or in any way change their facing. So you literally, if you're charged in the front by a single unit, you'd just go straight back. If you're charged in the front and the flank, and I think it goes on to this in the combat bit, so I don't also know why it's here, but I'll touch on it. If you're charged in the front and flank, you move diagonally away, but you don't sort of turn at all. You are still facing exactly the same direction. You just move diagonally away. Fall back in good order is treated as a flee roll, which means you pivot around impassable terrain. If any part of your unit goes off the board, you are destroyed. Things like that. However, you only go the highest of 2d6. So 2d6 bit highest, bit like a charge move, and they automatically rally at the end of that move. So you don't have to worry about them keep fleeing next turn. They just auto rally and can reform. Conveyance spells, like I mentioned, they're cast in the remaining move subphase. Big difference here for lone models. So previously, lone models could just pivot as much as they want, wouldn't cost any movement. It specifies here lone models, such as characters, monsters and chariots, etc., are units and move as such, meaning they've got to pay for their wheels. They can't just pivot and zip around things. If they want to reform, if they want to pivot, they have to reform, which costs all of their movement. Big change, but particularly for something like flying models. Now, probably won't get into it in these videos actually, but there's a rule or a formation called open order, which does let you pivot up to 90 degrees, I think it is, at the end of your move, which I believe all flying units are open order, or count as open order at least for that. So you do get a bit more maneuverability than a standard unit, but nowhere near as much as you used to have. Like it says, there are different rules for different formations, which I'm not going to go into here because honestly this video would probably be an hour long. And reinforcements, if there are any, they come on in the compulsory move subphase. They count as moving, place them with the back of the unit against the board edge, all pretty much exactly the way it was, I think, in 8th edition, and they can move, but they can't march, I believe. You can just move. Terrain, like I mentioned, takes 1 off your movement for difficult terrain. Open ground and hills, they're just open ground, nice and easy. If any unit ends its movement, with a quarter or more of its models in difficult terrain, they count as disrupted. So don't go charging through terrain. Now, they've also got these low linear and higher linear obstacles. These are basically walls, hedges, that sort of thing. So if they are less than 2 inches high, they're a low linear obstacle. God, that's quite hard to say. And you treat them as difficult terrain. If they're more than 2 inches high or 2 inches high or more, they're treated as impassable. And dangerous terrain. So if anything moves through it, roll a dice. On a 2+, you're fine. On a 1, you take a wound. No big changes there. What is a bit of a change is woods. So for the purposes of movement, woods are treated as difficult or dangerous terrain as agreed by the players. So this will need some clarifying in things like event packs, and will certainly be in our event packs, as to what you treat woods as. I should also clarify, dangerous terrain, you also take the -1 off of your movement. So dangerous terrain is difficult terrain with that additional test. So we haven't made a decision yet on what we will count woods as, whether it will be dangerous or difficult, but that will definitely be in our packs, and it will be something that will probably be decided, I'm sure, by gaming clubs all over the country, and it will be different in almost all of them, even though there's only 2 outcomes, but it will still manage to be different in all of them. And they've also got this battlefield decoration, which I think is going to be nice for, to be honest, mainly for things like battle reports on, YouTube, other video services, but also friendly games down the club and things like that. These are basically bits of terrain that are less than 2 inches across at their widest, and it basically says put them on, use them, jazz up your battlefields essentially, but completely ignore them in terms of movement. I don't even think they block line of sight, to be honest. Models move through them freely, you can charge through them, things like that. If they get in the way, just move them. But I think that's nice, like I said, to just sort of make battlefields look a bit more alive, if that makes sense. It's not just all open fields or open desert or open icy tundra. If you have a few houses around, then you can have, little clumps of barrels or a tiny little outbuilding somewhere, but it doesn't actually get in the way of anything, which is always a big thing with fantasy, and always has been, terrain sort of getting in the way. You want it, so the battlefield looks cool, but you also don't want it because it makes it a nightmare to move models. But that is it. We're finally there. The rules, the basic rules, and the more in detail rules for movement. Quite a few pages that we went over there. But hopefully you have, maybe learned some things if you've not looked through the rulebook yourself yet. If you have, let me know what you think about this whole charge move and how exactly that works. Because it'll be interesting to see what everyone thinks, and I wonder if we'll get any sort of clarification soon or at any point in the future from GW, but we will have to wait and see. On that note, thank you for joining me, and make sure you check back here tomorrow for the shooting phase video. And if you haven't already, hit that little subscribe and then the bell button on the Triple Crown Wargaming YouTube page, and you will get notified of all of our new videos, including the rest of these videos later this week.
Remember to tag your friends and like, subscribe and share. Then head over to triplecrownwargaming.com and become a Knight of the Realm today.
What are you doing, mate?
You alright? Do it for Warhammer!